Hi, welcome to African Perspective. My name is Nelda and I make videos about Africa from Mondays to Fridays. Today we're talking about the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. Why exactly are we talking about this and why should you care about Ebola in Uganda? Especially if you're not even from Uganda, especially if you're not even from Africa. The reason this is important is because global health does not care about your geography. Today, Ebola is in Uganda, but tomorrow it could be in another country. So, did you know that Ebola itself got its name from a river in Congo? In the DRC, but the strain that Uganda has right now has nothing to do with the DRC, has nothing to do with Uganda, but the strain is actually from Sudan. So that is exactly why it's important to talk about Ebola and to have these conversations about global health in multiple places in the world. However, for this channel, we focused on Africa and Africa alone because I don't think enough people are talking about Africa. And the reason I'm also talking about Uganda and the great job they've done in containing Ebola is precisely because when people talk about Africa, they don't often talk about the great things that African governments are doing. I am also one of the people who is very critical of African governments, but for this video, I'm going to be praising the government of Uganda for how quickly they dealt with Ebola. Before we get into all of that, let's just have a look at what exactly is Ebola. In the simplest way possible, Ebola is just a viral disease on steroids. That is the nicest way to put it, really, because Ebola is, if you look at the symptoms, they're exactly the same as like malaria, but like on steroids. It's fever, it's vomiting, nausea. But the extreme cases of Ebola are potentially what you've heard of. It's external and internal bleeding. And essentially, it is spread by contact with bodily fluids. So if it's somebody's vomit somehow, if you get into contact with somebody's vomit, or diarrhea, again, if you get into contact with that, sweat, semen, any kind of bodily fluids, that is how it's spread. So not surprisingly, the first person to get this case in the most recent outbreak in Uganda was a nurse. So you can imagine that this person was probably in contact with multiple people and then ended up contracting the disease that way. And so that was reported on January 29th, but by April 26th, Uganda already reported that they cleared Ebola, that they have dealt with this and contained it. So before we get into how Uganda was able to do that, especially if you're not familiar with Uganda as a country, I think it is important that we just take a step back and look at what exactly Uganda is as a country. So Uganda has a population of roughly 50 million people, and 50% of Uganda's population are people under the age of 14, which again is exactly why this is important to have conversations about health in Uganda, because by 2060, roughly 70% of Ugandans are going to be people of working age, which means if there is a pandemic, if there is an okay, pandemics are global, but if there is an epidemic like Ebola in a big city like Kampala, which is the capital city of Uganda, it's going to affect a lot of people who make up the workforce in the country. Like 80% of people who are working in Uganda are employed in the agriculture industry. And I know some of you work from home. I mean, I work from home as well, so I'm not going to be salty. But with agriculture, you're not going to be working from home, which is why it's very important to have a look at how exactly Uganda was able to do this and what exactly they can do to replicate what they did to get rid of Ebola. The first thing that Uganda did that was absolutely chef's kiss is that they already had protocols in place. Uganda learned from the lessons from the past. So this is not the first Ebola outbreak that Uganda has had. Previously, they had had it in multiple years before, and this was the sixth outbreak that they had. But because they learned from their lessons, like most of you should as well, Uganda was able to have protocols in place. They quickly responded. They had community health workers who were already trained on what to do if there's another Ebola outbreak. They already knew exactly what steps to follow. They had contact tracing in place. They had the equipment in place. Everything was already in place because Uganda was like, if this were to ever happen again, we do not want to lose as many people as possible. So they only ended up having one death and 9 cases, which is very, very impressive because Ebola has a fatality rate of 50%, which means if you have 10 people who have Ebola, chances are 5 of them are guaranteed that they're going to die. And Ebola does not play about. That is like the bare minimum, and Ebola does not do bare minimum. So the fact that only one person died in this sixth outbreak of Ebola in Uganda, I think that is absolutely amazing. So that is one of the ways Uganda had a rapid protocol in place, which just means they had a way to respond quickly to such an outbreak. They were prepared for it ahead of time. And I think this is important because there's so many issues that Uganda faces as a country, particularly in the health sector. I was reading a few statistics to prepare myself for this video, and one of them is that 16 women die daily in Uganda when they're giving birth. And I was thinking, if they could do this for Ebola, I understand they had to act quickly. It's an epidemic. The whole world is at risk if they don't act right. But I think they could employ exactly the same energy. They should give the same energy to maternal health. They should give the same energy to other diseases, things like cholera, things like malaria. All these diseases and all these health challenges that they're facing can also be tackled by having protocols in place. So that is number one. But number two, something else that they did absolutely amazing at is that Uganda collaborated with the international community. Now, I know. A lot of y'all are some of y'all, not all of y'all, some of y'all are not pro international involvement, particularly in African affairs. And my approach is that we can always invite international collaboration. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a terrible thing for a country to be isolated. If Uganda was isolated from the international community, there is no way Uganda would have been able to fight Ebola this way. But they communicated with the World Health Organization, which I know some of you have qualms with. I mean, the United States just left the WHO, so not everybody is happy with the WHO. But Uganda was able to fight Ebola successfully because they collaborated with the World Health Organization. They collaborated with the East African community. They were able to raise a total fund amount of $8 million to fight this Ebola outbreak effectively. So where did that money go? That brings me to the third point on how Uganda was able to fight Ebola. They employed community health workers, and these people were able to tackle the issue from the ground. So they broadcasted messages to ensure that there is no misinformation. They went around and talked to people, person to person. They had local workers who were talking to their community in a way that their community would understand. And this is very, very important. And this brings me to the wider implication of this conversation is that when we're designing health systems, when we're designing anything to do with health in any country, we can't just take one formula and apply it to everybody. Of course, there are frameworks and paradigms that will work for multiple countries. But when it comes to the specifics, you have to talk to the people in a way that they will understand. So imagine if Uganda went around talking about Ebola in French, for example. Not that they did that or they would even think of doing that, but they would have what they did correctly is that they employed local workers who spoke in Luganda and could communicate with the people. Like 84% of Uganda's population lives in rural areas. 50% of them live under the poverty line. These people are poor. And if you're going to communicate with them, you're not going to do some fancy schmancy AI ad on YouTube. You're going to use local workers who can have these conversations with the everyday person. And so I think this is very important just to speak about in the wider context when you're speaking about Africa and all the health challenges we're facing as a continent. Because there is a bunch of them. Africa is facing, I don't even know where to begin. We're facing so many health challenges. And I think it's important to remember that, yes, we need to invite international collaboration the way Uganda did. We also need to work together to come up with systems and solutions that are unique to our own countries. So again, I know I'm talking about this to inspire people to make changes in their own countries as well. However, just because this particular formula worked for Uganda doesn't mean the exact same formula step by step is going to work for another country like Central African Republic, for example, or Somalia, or Burkina Faso, or Botswana. No, there's a framework you should follow. Yes, have protocols in place, collaborate with the international community. However, you need to find specific ways that will work for your people. So I think this is an important conversation to have, and I hope this video was helpful for yourself. Let me know what you think about the video. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if there's any video recommendations that you have, just let me know, and I'll be happy to come and yap here. I make videos from Mondays to Fridays on Africa, anything to do with Africa. If it's a topic that is interesting, you'll see my face up in here. So feel free to subscribe. Please subscribe. I'm on the road to 300 subscribers, and I really am grateful that you watched this video this far. So thank you so much for watching, and you'll see me in the next video.